Welcome to the Jewelry Connoisseur Podcast. And now your host, Sonia Esther Soltani.
Hi, welcome to the Jewelry Connoisseur Podcast. I'm your host today. I'm Sonia Esther Soltani. I'm the editor-in-chief at Rapaport, looking after Rapaport magazine and the Jewelry Connoisseur blog. And today I have Guy Burton from Hancocks London. Thank you so much for joining me today. Hi, Guy.
Morning. Hi. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
So before we start, I'm just going to tell our listeners today we want to explore one, I think you'll tell me, but I think one of the most popular areas in estate jewelry, which is Art Deco, Roaring 20s. We're back in the Roaring 20s, and but back to 1920s. There's this style, the sleek, streamlined, monochromatic style became extremely popular. So I would like us to discuss that. But before going into it, can you tell us a bit more about you and your career at Hancocks and what Hancocks London offers to its clients?
Sure. As I said, my name's Guy, and I'm a director at Hancocks in London. Hancocks is a family-run jewellers. Hancocks was established in 1849 on the corner of Bond Street and Bruton Street. And although it's not still the Hancocks family, it's now the Burton family, it's still run and managed in the same way as it was back then. So what we deal with mostly today, and it's very similar to what Charles Hancock did back in 1849, is specialising in the really, really beautiful, finely made jewellery. A lot of which what we do today is their contemporary and our antique, of course. And one of my specialties and my focus is dealing with old cut diamonds and gems. And again, a lot of those would have been modern to Charles Hancock back in 1849 as well, of course. So the business itself is two-sided. There's the sale of Art Deco, Art Nouveau, antique Victorian, Edwardian jewellery, both signed and unsigned, but the very finest pieces that we can get our hands on. And then the other side of the business, which is specialised in antique and old cut diamonds and gems, and making new jewellery from those as one-of-a-kind pieces, which is more my focus. And this is mostly the engagement ring market, but not limited to just that.
So talking about cuts, diamond cuts, can you tell me a bit more about the diamond cuts that were popular from the 1920s to, I would say, it would have been the Second World War, even the Second World War, that Art Deco at this peak. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
I mean, that almost needs its own podcast, but it's an amazing subject. And my favourite, the step cuts as a general area from the 1920s, 30s up to the Second World War are, that's the absolute pinnacle, the peak time for these beautiful, beautiful ashes and carré cuts, and lovely emerald cuts, and they've got their beautiful big cut corners. And this movement obviously was completely driven by the Art Deco movement. Sort of you got the influence of the Cubist movement that came into the Art Deco movement, and with that you get this beautiful geometry, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more later on. And that developed these amazing cuts with beautiful, almost terrace-like faceting, drawing your eye towards the centre of the stone in a beautifully proportioned Asher cut. Really lovely big cut corners. So quite often the Asher cut diamonds are almost completely octagonal, something you very rarely see in a modern cut Asher these days due to obvious commercial effects on value for sort of shaving off weight like that of a diamond. So this is my sort of favourite area of vintage cut diamonds. They've got a beautiful elegance to them. And sort of against the sort of the grain of what a lot of people would believe, a very well cut old step cut will have a huge amounts of life, and it can rival a brilliant cut every day of the week if it's been cut by a masterful hand.
Is it actually that was driven by, as you said, the Cubist movement, and the lines were different by house. Can you tell us a bit more about how the cuts fits the general geometric vision of designers in his days? Yeah,
sure. So before that, you have, obviously you have the sort of table cuts originally, hundreds of years ago. But prior to this, the popular diamond cuts are the old mine cushion cuts, nice, soft, rounded edges. And then towards the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, when bruting developed, you obviously have the old European brilliant, you had to get lovely round symmetry, very curved shapes, which just happened to suit the Art Nouveau trend and what the Victorians were making in jewellery. So having something that had lovely straight lines, very geometric, sharp edges, and the faceting as crisp and sharp as well and geometric like this was very, very new. Now, in the Art Deco movement, they use this a lot to contrast. You have brilliant cuts contrasting with the geometric shapes of ashes as well. So really highlighted these shapes, and you see, and obviously these are all traits that you see throughout the movement, not just limited to diamond cuts and jewelry, but in architecture, of course, and all other parts of all other industries of the Art Deco movement.
And do you have like specific examples of designers that were the stars of the leaders in this movement in creating geometric jewelry after the more floral, organic shapes of the Art Nouveau?
Well, yes. There's some of the, in my opinion, the Art Deco movement is showcased the biggest strength in the jewelry industry is the golden age, really. You would have people, jewelry houses, come on to particular ones in a moment, ones that were very happy to create pieces at great expense, which far outstretch the expense of the centerpiece gem, if you will. Mm. So it's a very artistic movement. Now, the big names such as Cartier, Van Cleef, Mauboussin, Chaumet, all the ones you'd expect, they really did master this movement. And I mean, Cartier for me I think for a lot of people would be sort of the number one champions or the best example to come to, who use this and make this amazing geometry in their pieces. Geometry, not always, but beautiful symmetry as well, and created fantastic pieces. Really, and these were really very, very modern pieces. I mean, we think of the Art Deco movement as a beautiful, eloquent, vintage movement, but that's lasted the test of time. But back in 1920s and 1930s, this is an extremely modern, a completely new way of thinking, and that's what I love about it, because quite often when it is reused with respect in new jewelry, it creates that fresh feeling. And that, for me, I think it really was the pinnacle of jewelry design. And in thousands of Cartier pieces, and other big names like them, you'll see this coming across.
I think that's very interesting what you're saying, Guy, about how it's still such an influence on modern designers. I mean, I look at a lot of contemporary jewelry, and I think the Art Deco inspired tag comes up so much, in the shapes, in the type of stones used, but nothing beats the original, I would be tempted to say. And how do you see the type of pieces that I see in contemporary jewelry that are inspired by Art Deco are very often rings and pendants, earrings? Can you tell us from the original era what were the big styles of jewelry, the pieces that were emblematic of this period?
I think really the Art Deco movement has it all. I mean, being, as I mentioned, having being the golden age of jewelry manufacture and the joy of wearing jewelry. I think it expanded it hugely. So obviously you have the beautiful earrings, necklaces, brooches were in everything, rings. They obviously all appeared. Some of the more delicate jewelry, I mean, corsages and tiaras, perhaps. Were sort of fell out a little bit of fashion, but sort of instead of tiaras, you have bandeaus and these beautiful headpieces, and I think people were very adaptable. But what it did, it also opened up with the backdrop to the movement. You've got to remember that the Art Deco period came after, straight after the First World War, and pretty much, I think it's more it's the social expression or the expression that people wanted, the feelings that people wanted to express after the First World War that drove this movement, this freedom to, they wanted to be more liberal, they wanted to live life, and I think they very much, either they knew themselves or their parents, not far back ago, knew what danger was and what the absolute horrors of war were, and they wanted to enjoy life. And with this, that changed fashion. I mean, what ladies would dare to wear in 1925 to 15 years before was completely different. And obviously, this opened up wearing, bracelets and pieces of jewelry and on open skin where they may not have seen it before. And but it didn't also do it in a very Art Nouveau, very feminine way. It also opened it up in a very stylish way, which opened up for men as well. It's not an overly feminine movement, because there you have the beautiful dress sets and cufflinks and gemmed cigarette cases and lighters that could be used by men as well as the ornaments. And another thing I thought it's certainly worth mentioning from this era is the objet. The picture frames and the clocks. Again, Cartier with the beautiful mystery clocks. This is all part of that movement that sort of is slightly bigger than jewelry, but it's still in that world.
Can you tell us a bit more about the mystery clock by Cartier, which is a real technical achievement on top of being aesthetically so beautiful? Can you tell us a bit more, because I think it's one of the iconic objects from the period. Definitely,
yeah. So it's almost more sculpture than a clock, and Cartier were the masters. They weren't the only ones creating beautiful timepieces at this mantelpieces and things at that time, but the mystery clock is something very special, and the movement it'll always be something interesting and not immediately obvious how it works or tells the time, and that's part of the joy of it. And then using beautiful materials, often sort of Asian influence as well. So you see a lot of jade, mother of pearl in these pieces, and they're I think sculpture is probably the best way to describe what they are, but they're extremely iconic. So and Cartier enjoyed using this a lot throughout, with their cigarette cases and makeup boxes as well and things like this. So it's a very, very exciting part of the Art Deco movement.
There's something else that you mentioned about the desire to live, to party, to rejoice after 5 horrific years of war, and I think it also obviously affected the way women dressed, as you said. They were showing more skin. The hair got cut. The flapper. You always think of the 1920s as a woman with short hair and the cigarette case. And do you feel that's also something that's appealing to? Who do you see coming into Hancocks and looking for pieces from the 1920s? Do you see women being particularly attracted to this aesthetic and the history behind it?
I actually think it's developed. I think the sort of rose-tinted nostalgia has changed opinions today a little bit differently. I think at the beginning of the Art Deco movement, it was almost rebellious. And these ladies who would, at least at the beginning part of the movement, were taking on these new trends and wearing jewelry in different ways and different designs, as not as a strong rebellion in any way, but it certainly had a rebellious streak to it. I think the people who are pulled to Art Deco original Art Deco jewelry today, collectors and people wear it, are not necessarily younger girls in their sort of 20s and 30s who are looking to express any rebellious streaks, but who are picking on the refined streaks and an elegant feel of the Art Deco movement, which it had. But I think that's what makes the movement so interesting, because it was this beautiful combination of different styles that created the Art Deco movement, which was very off the norm, but it just really struck true, and it really, I mean, for me, and I think for a lot of people, it just really worked. It was that perfect pitch, and therefore it's lasted the test of time. But I think it's in different periods of time, it's been viewed in different ways. I don't know, because I wasn't alive in the 1960s and early 70s, but I should think the view on Art Deco jewelry then would have been slightly different, because it would have been what mother wore and things like that. So I think views on this do change. But with the Art Deco movement, I think certainly today it's been very, very positive, and certainly for the most popular modern movement.
What do you see as popular pieces in Hancocks? Something that always seem to appeal to your clients.
So popular piece at Hancocks. I mean, rings are always very, very popular. Sort of a cocktail ring that will always attract attention. But things like bracelets, although can really showcase incredible skill and craftsmanship, aren't quite as wearable today as they sadly as they once were. So things like rings can probably get a little bit more practical use out of. Sometimes I think the more simple, eloquent Art Deco necklaces and things like that are actually quite nice, because they showcase the movement in a subtle way without being too ostentatious, and they have a very beautiful, refined feel to them. So that I think that type of jewelry just appeals to people these days most of all. I'd love to say it's the bandeaus and the beautiful long sautoirs, but and even the full dress sets, which are more for men, which are more collectible than purchased to wear.
Can you tell us what a dress set?
So a dress set would be stud for a gentleman who's wearing black tie or white tie. They would obviously they replace their buttons with diamonds or sapphire studded dress studs for their shirt and for their waistcoat, and cufflinks, of course. So, unless this would, this wasn't an article invented by the Art Deco movement, but it was certainly more popularised by the movement. Mm-hmm. And you get some very flamboyant stars. We have a beautiful set at the moment of sapphire and diamond 1930s dress set by Boucheron, and I just wish I could find an excuse to wear them, but unfortunately I don't wear black tie as often as they might have done back in those days.
Because that's interesting, because the styles travel, obviously. People had different social commitments, and maybe the social engagements were not as structured that they were during the Edwardian eras, where you had to change the jewelry and the clothes you were wearing during the day. I think there was something a bit more free in the 1920s. But it's nice to see men wearing this type of jewelry again. So we see a lot of men actually being very interested in getting these collector's items. How many gentlemen do you see inquiring about Art Deco?
I mean, we certainly do see quite a few. I think once an interest has been displayed in jewelry and in the craftsmanship and the beauty of jewelry, whether that is as a collector or as somebody who wishes to wear it, it doesn't matter what your thoughts are of Art Deco. That you have to take notice of it, because it's had such an influence on jewelry today, and it's obviously very relevant. The build up to Art Deco is very very relevant. So it has to take note. So we do, when collectors come in, even if their aim is not for Art Deco pieces, they will very often have huge appreciation for them. And if it's, the gentlemen who are looking for, say, cufflinks, maybe not full dress sets, very, very often they will specifically ask if we had any Art Deco cufflinks.
That's very interesting. You see, I would like to have your opinion on that, because when I see contemporary jewelry being inspired by Art Deco styles and lines, it's very often the geometric, the sleek lines. We don't see as many. There was a whole revival of this Egyptomania after 1922, when the tomb was discovered in Egypt, but the tomb of Tutankhamun. What can you tell us a bit more about this specific influence of Egypt and also of India, especially on the Cartier pieces? Because it seems like this is really typically Art Deco, but that's why it makes a difference between the contemporary jewelry with the geometric lines and something that's you only find in the authentic pieces, in the ones from the original times.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, so the sort of the Egyptian influence after the discovery of the Tutankhamun tomb is again, it's quite refreshing to see that they didn't break all the rules in the Art Deco movement. The Victorians obviously had a huge interest in archaeological revival jewellery, and you see a lot of that influence come in that movement in the mid 19th century and the late 19th century. So when that appeared in the Art Deco movement, it's done in a completely new way, and the use of this sort of scarabs and carved gems was fantastic. And you mentioned India, obviously. Jacques Cartier went over to India and I believe himself sought through all these beautiful carved emeralds and sapphires and rubies. Not all of incredibly high standard. I mean, obviously a lot of them were, but it's the fascination in that completely new movement to those kind of pieces and jewelry to them that sort of intrigued him. And then he'll come back and create pieces such as tutti frutti pieces, pretty much completely made up of those kind of items. The further influence of the Egyptians was after Tutankhamun. That re-sparked interest. Is wonderful as well, and but they displayed it in a completely different way, of course. And again, you do actually see some of that in all aspects of Art Deco jewelry. What I mean by that is you see them in the clocks, and you see them in necklaces and rings and everything. So it's an interesting aspect to it, and it doesn't have any of the geometry or symmetry that you might expect elsewhere. But it is expressing it in a completely new way.
Carl, you mentioned one of the iconic stars from the period that I think is also a Cartier innovation, Tutti Frutti. Can you explain to our listeners a bit what was the style and what the characteristic of the jewelry from this?
So the Tutti Frutti pieces by Cartier, they consisted of these lovely carved sapphires, emeralds, rubies. They had faceted diamonds in them as well, quite often, and you'd see these mostly bracelets, very very collectible. And we had a beautiful Tutti Frutti bracelet just a few years ago, which I wish we still had. And these were all sorts of carved gems put together in a seemingly asymmetrical way. And created these wonderful pieces. I mean, it's extremely colourful, and I mean the term Tutti Frutti, I think, sums it up better than any other sort of item of the era, really, because it's exactly what it sounds like. And I remember when I first started, and when I first came into the family business, and my father mentioned that he was buying a Tutti Frutti bracelet. I thought he was going Tutti Frutti. I didn't realise it was a real term. But it really does. It's really fun. It's a really fun, beautiful piece. It's got all that colour and texture with the carved gems. So it's very engaging jewellery. Now they've come to be one of the most collectible Cartier pieces that there are, because the skill to curate those stones, to have them made and put them all together to make these beautiful flowing pieces is not immediately obvious, really, when you look at it from a distance. But the skill is incredible, and it's very, very, it's as iconic as almost as the Panther is to Cartier.
Absolutely. And is it difficult to as an estate jewelry dealer, is it difficult to source pieces like Tutti Frutti pieces, but more general from Art Deco? Are people actually selling them, or is there going to be a shortage as they become more popular?
Yeah, becoming the more collectible the items, yes, the harder they are to get, and the fewer come to the market. And so, yes, no, they're certainly harder to buy. Auction prices have obviously have thrown the prices up hugely as well. So, whereas you may have had a chance to buy one at a reasonable level auction sort of some years ago, I mean, now, the auction is where they get these world record prices. So really, you need to be buying them privately, which we do from time to time, but it is certainly harder to find. Certainly harder to find than it used to be, to find these very, very rare collectible pieces. especially ones with a theme like that. So yeah, no, it is tough, and also we often seek out ones with provenance as well, and a lot of the important pieces that we see as important pieces now still will have been important pieces then, and quite often that goes hand in hand with provenance, and perhaps owned by a person of note. So, which also is something we like to buy.
And talking about the rare items, which one has been in your career at Hancocks London the most exceptional Art Deco piece you've been lucky to get in and to sell?
So, that's a difficult question, because obviously Art Deco is a very large part of our stock. I would say. That's very difficult. Also, don't normally like saying things that mentioning items that we don't currently own. But there's beautiful one piece that I always think of when someone says Art Deco. There's beautiful, very early 1930s diamond and sapphire Maupassant, the sort of buckle bracelet. We had it for a few months, and it was very well priced in this, but it didn't immediately sell, and I didn't really understand at the time, because it was probably one of the most beautiful pieces I'd ever seen, and I remember it very vividly. And it was made up of beautiful sort of square French cut diamonds, and sort of buff top sapphires, so sort of cabochon polished sapphires intermittently, and then running into a non-symmetrical shape. And it was one of the most beautiful pieces I'd ever seen, and I'd probably say that was probably my favorite Art Deco piece, even though it was quite classic. It was very classic Art Deco. So yeah, I'd say that one.
But it found a buyer after a few months, ultimately.
Oh yeah, of course it certainly did find a buyer. But I mean, I think I've always been drawn to that lovely sapphire and diamond combination, which again is something. I mean, it's on a very basic level of Art Deco beauty, but it's albeit it's a very Art Deco feature.
You gave us such a great overview and into the movement, into the style. So thank you so much, Guy. I think there's been, I hope for you and for our listeners, an interesting experience.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think for people who are coming into jewelry, who are a bit new, that I hope they learned about how to recognize an Art Deco piece and how to appreciate the beauty and the unique features of the movement. Now, tell us, what would be your advice to people who want to collect, to wear Art Deco jewelry? What would be, as someone who has your experience and your knowledge?
What I would say is, for new collectors who wishing to buy Art Deco jewelry, is first of all, if budget allows it, I would look at some of the big jewelry houses, the names. I mean, with that, such as Cartier and Van Cleef and Maupassant and dozens more. If I would look to them, because they really did have the finest craftsmen of the era, and arguably some of the finest craftsmen of any era. So I would look to them. However, there's beautiful Art Deco jewelry out there that is unsigned or by less famous makers. And looking at those pieces, I would first of all, I'd trust your eye. Whatever item of jewelry it is, trust your eye for the beauty. You have to love the piece and the elegance of it, and then confirm that by turning the piece over and looking at the back and looking at the quality of its craftsmanship, because it's got to look beautiful from the back and from inside and outside, and the manufacture of it is vital for it to hold value and to be able to be worn.
Fantastic. Look at the back of the piece of jewelry. That's, I think, a great advice for any collector, actually, to see how beautiful the every single angle is of a piece of jewelry.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you so much, Guy. Really, really appreciate everything you've shared with us today. I hope our listeners will also enjoy it, and we'll share the detail of Hancocks London at the end of the podcast, so people can have a better idea of what you're offering, and obviously also on social media. We hope they follow your account. Every month, I know you share the piece of the month, which we usually try to share on Rapaport magazine on our Instagram. So they're always beautifully curated pieces. So we'll share all this. And thank you so much, Guy. I wish you a good day.
Thank you.
And if you have anything else that you'd like to add, please tell us.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure talking about the Art Deco movement, and it's always enjoyable to, especially at times like these, to talk about the beauty of the movement and the reasoning behind it. And I always think it's interesting, very interesting to think about the social history behind each movement in jewellery. And I think the Art Deco time, the Roaring Twenties, is a very nice era to think of right now, and a very fun era. And I'm sure a lot of people around the world are looking forward to celebrating once the world is in a slightly better place to now. So it's very apt.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think we'll appreciate the term "Roaring Twenties" again when we're all out and about again, in safety and health, hopefully.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Guy, for your time today. I wish you well, and we'll conclude this podcast.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us at the Jewelry Connoisseur Podcast. If you enjoyed this and would like more top-quality jewelry content, check out the Jewelry Connoisseur blog, jewelryconnoisseur.net.